the entire community, and everyone's looking to this young widow to see if is she going to take over an agribusiness company. He left you with a mess. The tears started coming of, yeah, he really did. And, and not a lot of people knew about it. And, oh, what have I done? And did I do the right thing? And you go through a little bit of it. You could go through a little bit or a lot of an identity crisis, actually. He pulled me out of the room and F-bombs were flying. I was so ticked.
This is Built to Sell Radio with your host, John Warlow.
I love stories like Sandy's because you're not going to see them on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, but I think in many ways they're more interesting. They're the real life stories of business owners who have built and ultimately sold a company. And if you know someone like that, or if maybe you yourself are someone like that, please consider nominating them. We get our best stories from our listeners. Just go to builttosell.com/nominate. Welcome to another edition of Built to Sell Radio. My name is John Warlow. This is the podcast that helps you punch above your weight in a negotiation to sell your company. Good to be back in your earbuds again today. We've got a kind of an interesting story to get to. Before we go there, though, I just wanted to say two things. Number one, if you like the show and would be willing to write a review, it would be amazing. A review really helps us spread the word. It helps us rank in all the streaming platforms, and we all read them, so it gets us kind of excited about putting the show together for you. So if you have a chance to review us on any of the big streaming platforms, it would be amazing. Secondly, if you like today's show comes from a nomination. If you know of anybody who has built and sold a company that you think would make a great guest on Built to Sell Radio, by all means, please nominate them. Just go to builttosell.com/nominate. All right. With that business out of the way, let's get into today's episode because it's a little unique. And to set it up, I want to ask you a question. What do you think are the triggers that cause people to sell their company? We all have these triggering events that come up from time to time. What do you think the most common triggering events are that cause business owners to want to sell? As you contemplate that, let me tell you the statistical answers to the questions. The two most common statistical reasons that people decide to sell are, number one, they get approached by a potential acquirer with an unsolicited offer that makes them think twice, thinking, that's interesting. Maybe I'll dive in deeper. Or number two, they have some sort of health scare. And my next guest experienced the latter. Her name is Sandy Hansen Wolff. As she will describe, she and her new husband were not more than married for a year. His business was successful on the outside, generating more than $1 million in annual sales when he was diagnosed with leukemia, ultimately succumbing to the disease. And what you will hear is the story of a individual who ended up owning a business she never planned to start, never planned to own, never planned to run, and how difficult that was for her being put in that position. So I just want you to think about, God forbid, if anything happened to you, what that would be like for the people in your life. And if there are things you need to do now to make sure that that is a reasonably smooth transition, it will probably be one of the best things you can do for the people in your life that you love and that you hope to make sure that they have a smoother transition in the event that something tragic were to happen to you. With all that as set up, I think you'll enjoy this conversation with Sandy, who comes at it from a sense of vulnerability and also some great tips at the end on negotiation, sort of back and forth that she experienced in the sale of her company. Here to tell you her entire story is Sandy Hansen Wolff. Sandy Hansen Wolff, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
I am excited to be here, and it's an honor to be a part of your show, John. Thank you.
Oh, it's good to have you here. And we're going to talk about Agventure Feed and Seed, your company. But to do that, I want to take you back, if you wouldn't mind, to January 3rd, 2003, which was a really tough day for you. Tell us the story of how that day unfolded.
Yes, happy to share. January 3rd, 2003 was the day that I lost my first husband, Randy. Randy was the owner of Agventure Feed and Seed. I was not involved. We were actually married only for 15 months when he lost his life to the complications of leukemia. So all of a sudden, the community, the bankers, the accountant, everyone was looking to me saying, now what for Agventure? And we did have a chance, since he had leukemia, to do a little bit of a succession plan. And basically what that involved was, Sandy, you'll have to figure it out. And actually the plan was, if something happens to me, sell the company. So when he passed away, my plan was I'll look to see how that will look. What
was that like for you? What were you doing professionally at the time? And when Randy turned to you and said, if I don't make it, I need you to kind of take things over and sell the company. What was your reaction to that? Yes.
Well, actually, he didn't bring it up. I did. Because we were headed to the hospital for months he was going for a bone marrow transplant. And I said, I think it was the day before we left for the hospital, knowing we'd be gone for months. I said, the doctor said 25% of the people don't come out of this alive. What happens if you don't come home with me? And so we took, I don't know, I'm sure I have the sheet of paper somewhere. It was a blank notebook sheet of paper. And I said, tell me where your bank accounts are, because we didn't have time to go through that. We were only married for a short time and then dealing with his sickness. And he just said, if that happens, sell my company. Here's my few bank accounts. And I used that sheet of paper as the roadmap. So it was, when he passed away, it was obviously pretty traumatic, number one, to be 30 years old and a widow. And then two, all of a sudden, the entire community and everyone's looking to this young widow to see, is she going to take over an agribusiness company? And so I think it was a few days after the funeral, I went into the company and talked to the staff. And that's when I found out we had great customers, we had amazing employees, and the company wasn't doing well because of his absence more than anything. So that was a real shocker.
I bet.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what the business sold. Like, what was the business model for folks who've never been to your town? What is Agventure Feed and Seed?
Yes. So we were a regional feed company. So we had a retail location where hobby farmers and small farms would come with their trucks or whatever and get animal feed. We did most of our business delivering bulk feed out to dairy and beef farms. And so we were the local link to the farms, and we worked in partnership with our vendor companies who did the manufacturing and helped us on the service side. So it was regional to central Minnesota. And so we obviously, I was there for 18 years. So my main thought when he died was, well, then I'll just have to figure this company out and restore it, and I'll sell it in 6 months. Well, that was my very utopian, hopeful plan.
Because what you learned from the employees was it, quote unquote, wasn't doing very well. What did you discover? I mean, when you say wasn't doing very well, was it in financial distress? Like, tell me what was going on at that point.
Yes, it was actually the perfect storm, really. We had, prior to Randy's passing, we had bought out his partner. They weren't seeing eye to eye, a typical thing in partnerships, weren't seeing eye to eye, and they just needed to part ways. So Randy, he just said, we need to pay more just so that we can be out on our own. And that's usually what happens a little bit when a partnership goes south. So, and how did Randy value the business for the purposes of buying out his partner? Worked with our attorney, or his attorney at the time, I guess. I wasn't too involved. Worked with the accountant and the attorney. So
and did
it
he
was,
take cash out of the business to pay him off directly, or was it paying him off over time?
yes. So we took out new loans through our local bank for the amount that we could. And we leveraged, typical thing, you leverage your home to do it.
Oh, wow.
And what we couldn't cover with a loan and get collateral that way, the extra went on as a payout, like a 7-year pay to the owner. So they finance some of it. Or yes.
Okay, so let me get this straight.
Previous
So your husband passes away. You kind of walk in to a situation where you've taken on debt, both in the business, but also personally guaranteeing that debt with the bank in order to pay out the partner. And you've got an obligation to the partner for 7 years going forward.
Yes.
And so that debt is probably causing just a financial burden. You've got to pay down that debt. But what else is going on? Is the business healthy other than the debt, or are there other issues in the company at this time?
So we had a very healthy customer base, which I'm grateful for, because a lot of the customers stuck with us and gave us a chance to figure this out. When a lot of I would hear rumors, obviously, in the community, like, she'll never be able to do it. What's a young woman doing in agribusiness anyway? She's just doing this for fun. And, the thing of it is, as an owner, you can't tell a lot of people the situation. Like my internal customer, my internal staff knew what was going on. My banker knew, and my accountant. But other than that, I was pretty tight-lipped with how bad it really was. And it was bad because we had just bought out the partner. So I always say we had $500,000 of debt, which would be about $2 million right now. And the owner who had just died, typical entrepreneurial model where you don't have a lot of processes written down. So one of the biggest struggles we had were, what are our margins and what should they be? And it doesn't really help when you can't go ask that person the questions that should be running your company. So that was a great lesson right out of the gate, is we need to cross-train, and we need to figure out how, even in a small company, how to put things down on paper.
We talk a lot about standard operating procedures on this show, and it confounds me from time to time how few entrepreneurs create standard operating procedures, documents, written instructions, and so forth. Because I think at the end of the day, we know we need them. Like, we know that, like, it's like vitamins, right? That, you kind of know you should take them, but sometimes you just have better things to do, or you forget it. As you look back at Randy's situation, have you been able to pinpoint why he did not write up his standard operating procedures and the instructions for you all?
Yes. I think everyone was really intelligent in the whole mix, including Randy. He was there all the time. So when you're there all the time, you're always there to answer the question, and the information we need to work day to day. And, so a lot of people are busy working in their company and not on their company. And that's the same thing. It's like he was enjoying what he was doing, and he kept the whole mix going, and it worked great. And so I think a lot of people just get really, I don't know that this was Randy. I just don't think he ever got around to it or thought he needed all of these written protocols, because he was just so present and passionate about his company.
He was going to go out boots first kind of idea. Now, little did we know that was going to be much sooner than.
Yes. Well, I think a lot of times, especially entrepreneurial minded people, including myself, I'm more visionary and want to go after the next big idea more than do the daunting work of putting stuff, any information to paper and creating processes. So, the one thing that I work on, and I still do in my coaching and consulting, is simple works. Simple processes work, complicated does not. And so we slowly built that into it. So you can pay a lot of money for consultants that you'll have a process for everything. So just defining what you need first and going from there, and allowing it to be a process more than this daunting thing of where to start.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, for sure. So, okay, so let's go fast forward. So, roughly, where are you at the time of Randy's passing? How big is the company in terms of revenue?
mhm.
Roughly, what are you guys doing at that time?
Yeah. So when he passed away, it was right around 1 million in sales,
Got it.
which was a nice small company 20 years ago. So, I had obviously no idea what I was getting into. And thankfully, again, employees were there to support and a few key professionals.
So, fast forward so people understand how big did you get Agventure Feed and Seed? Like, what was the top at your height? How much revenue were you
Yes,
generating?
we had grown a few years before I sold. We had grown to a little over the 8 million mark. And it
Wow.
was kind of by design, John, because I knew that I had a lot of ideas and solid opportunities to really scale it much beyond that. And what I stayed true to was I really wanted a lifestyle type of business. And when you lose someone when you're 30, I really was mindful of my employees' life outside of work, as well as my own, and wanting to rebuild my life too. So I worked really hard and I was super passionate. And I also promoted the fact that everyone has a life outside of our work too. And we built that model into that. So sometimes I would get condemned of or criticized of why aren't you growing even larger than you can? And at that point in my life, I loved the size we were at, and we always were. We scaled considerably, and that was. Would I do it different now? I'm not sure. I was really proud of what we built, especially the way we started. So. Mm-hmm.
Got it. So you went roughly from a million in 2003 to 8 million, 2017, 2018,
Mm-hmm.
2019,
Yes.
that kind of time frame. Got it. So that's a significant amount of growth. It doesn't sound like a lifestyle business to me. It sounds like a growth business.
Yes, it's a nice size, small company, definitely.
Yeah. When you look back, with hindsight being 2020,
Mm-hmm.
what do you see as the one or two strategic moves that made the biggest difference? Is there one that really pops to mind?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'll say this in all humbleness. The nice part about coming in blind to a company is that you have I felt it was some sort of a burden back then, but really it was the ace in the hole. I could come in with a fresh set of eyes and look at things very creatively. And so since we didn't have money and we were having to pay off all this new debt, we didn't have money to hire people to help us either. So then, I guess in hindsight, I'm like, I created the gig economy model 20 years ago, and I didn't even know what I was doing. And
What
I'm
do you
like,
mean by that?
So instead of hiring everyone in-house and, like most feed companies, they'd have their own big milling plant and things like that. I'm like, let's contract everything out. So I always kept a very small key staff in the beginning because we had to. And then I'm like, how do we keep costs down? And if we don't need people full time, why wouldn't we just hire people on contract or work with our vendors and not pay people at all, just partner with them? And so that was the best idea I could come up with. And I'm like,
Sandy, how do you do that? Admittedly, you're in a male-dominated industry. You're a woman who's coming from a different industry into the ag business without a lot of experience. How do you do that without undermining your credibility, without undermining your ability to lead? Effectively look stupid without undermining, because I think curiosity and the willingness to ask great questions and the kind of learner's mindset and the beginner's mindset, I think is an incredible asset. But it can also make you vulnerable to
yes.
some people. How did you stick handle that?
Well, number one, I think I was very vulnerable. I mean, it was, not number one, when something tragic like this happens, the competition wants to bite too. It's like, ooh, weak moment. Let's go market it to their customers, of which they were always trying to get each other's business anyway. But I think even more. So you had competition chomping, but some of the people, I mean, even our vendors were like, we're not sure she's going to make it. So we need to protect these accounts too. And so, yes, I think some people did think this is a stupid play, quite literally. It will never work. And I remember having succinct conversations. I think I just had so much conviction that, actually I felt, for lack of a better way to say it, I felt really trapped and desperate of how am I going to pay off all this debt. So, but I was also really convicted on the passion and the legacy that was left for me. And the nice part about not having a lower point to go to is that you could only go up, really, right? And I didn't see it as that, but I think I did appear stupid to some. And I remember having succinct conversations, especially with our vendor partners, because they were starting to work against us. And I get it, to protect their own and their own stake in the claim. And I remember having succinct conversations at our front counter with their sales reps and so on, saying, you're either, okay, this BS basically has to stop. Either you are working with us or you're working against us. You decide, but we're not going anywhere. We're not shutting the doors. We're not going anywhere. So you decide, do you want to work with us or against us? And they decided to work with us more, but it was a constant battle of trying to, even get my toe in the sandbox to be able to play the game with them. And, over time, I guess I really changed my mind on that, because when you are different, we don't always get to play in the sandbox anyway. And I decided I don't really want to. Let's just do good, be very people oriented, do good for all, and be good to people, have a good service, have a good product, and make them want to work with us, or make them curious of how we're doing it.
Hi there, it's John Warlow. You're listening to Built to Sell Radio, and I'm talking to Sandy Hansen Wolff, the former owner and CEO of Agventure Feed and Seed. Sounds like a very, very middle America, very traditional. This is not a technology company. This is not innovative. I'm sure you did innovative things, but it wasn't like you're landing aircraft or spacecraft on barges. This is a blocking and tackling, doing the right things, doing the simple things really, really well kind of business. Did you ever feel resentful towards Randy for putting you in the position that he put you in, albeit obviously not intentionally, but did you ever feel like a sense of resentment?
Good question. And the answer is yes, and not right away. And the reason I say that is I always accepted my lot in life pretty well. Like, well, I guess this is the path that has been created for me. And it wasn't until, I guess I'm kind of, I like to learn. And I'm like, well, I guess when somebody dies, people go to grief counseling. I guess that's just what people do. So maybe that would help me, and this was maybe 2 years later. And so that's what I did, just because I'm like, well, I might be able to learn, and who knows what I don't know. And I think I'm doing all right, but whatever. So I went to grief counseling to a pastor, and he had noticed that I hadn't gone through the anger phase of grieving. So he's the one who mined that out of me. And he actually used like some swear words to get the anger phase going of like, and I'll paraphrase, but doesn't this just tick you off, the mess he left you with? And I'm like, well, I was still pretty calm about it. I'm like, well, this is just how life went, and it's like, well, he left you with a mess. And, it didn't take too long before the tears started coming of, yeah, he really did. And, and not a lot of people knew about it. And, but, it wasn't intentional. He would have never done that on purpose. He was the kindest guy ever. So, so, even then, but actually after that, what I would just, I'd be like, okay, Randy, I'm in a pickle in this one, the whole 18 years I owned the company. You better come down and help with this one or whatever. I can't figure it out. So, Yeah. Yeah, I think anyone, yeah, I mean, even now looking at the pandemic, so many owners are in a state of such frustration and resentfulness of different things and people leaving. There's so many reasons to be upset.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And again, no fault of your own. You're left to pick up the pieces, but not something you asked for necessarily. You mentioned there were two big strategic moves that you made, or a couple. One was having this beginner's mind, or just curiosity, just doing things differently, and being an outsider actually helped you. Was there a second sort of strategic move you made? Because you did grow the business from $1 million to $8 million. That's a huge, that's a huge growth. Was there a second thing that you did strategically that you think really paid off in the end?
Yes, I think we always had just to keep it very top level, we always had a visionary element of like trying to think about how we could transform the company and up level next, so we always were shifting of how we did things or what service was needed, that kind of thing. And the one, actually just personally, the one thing that really started working for me is, instead of being so defensive and not knowing who was on my side, I really kind of let my wall down and I said, who can I trust? And I picked a few trusted people who were trying to help. So that was the beginning. The one thing that we did about 3 years before we sold was, it was a come to Jesus moment for myself and my two key staff of, okay, the industry is now really changing. We've lost a few key accounts, and it wasn't detrimental at that point. And I said, I'm fairly certain there will be more of this. And either we double down and we create a new dynamic to our company so that no one vendor has too much control over us, or we quit while we're on top and I try to sell the company now. And we decided to create, so my idea was, and this was before it was, I always look at human trends, like of superfood for humans now that's really popular. And my idea 4 or 5 years ago was, let's put an essential oil blend in feed, because I'm fairly certain that we're going to have to figure out how to do animal feed naturally too. And so that's what we did. And we were, I'm sure all the big companies have something like that now, of course. So that's what we did. And my goal was, well, if the dairy and beef industry in rural America isn't doing good, let's sell essential oil-based chicken feed to urban America. Like the backyard farms and so on, because those people have disposable income when my farmers don't. They're strapped. And so my thing was, I want to sell chicken feed to metropolitan areas all over the US using an e-commerce model. And so it was as far as chicken feed. And what happened was, so we developed, it was just a brand within Agventure. And about a year before we sold, we made it into a separate S Corp. And it's called New Heritage Feed Company. And I still own that startup. So I'm actually looking for new partners now as I need a new team and things like that, and have different aspirations for that.
So you had New Heritage as a brand working effectively in parallel to Agventure.
Yes. Yep.
Got it. Got it.
And it was a strategic move to make our company more dynamic. And so I went to a different milling partner so that we could have our own. Actually, I thought it was going to be one product, and it ended up being an entire a brand line of feed. I'm like, all of a sudden, we went from one product, and then that took off, in our area of the chicken feed. And then our farmers saw that it worked good. Like the chickens were healthier naturally, and, laying more eggs, that kind of thing, faster to market if it was meat birds and so on. And so they asked for other things. So it ended up being calf feed and beef feed for beef farms. And then we did a dairy additive to add onto the top of a cow's feed to help with their health and so on. And before I knew it, we had a whole brand line, and had created basically a new feed company. So like,
that's
whoa.
Nice.
Yes.
So what triggered you to want to sell Agventure?
I'm in the built to sell model. the day that I started working in the company, I always thought, well, just the way I got in, I'm like, well, I'm going to build it to sell it. That was my mentality before I even came across your book, John, all those years ago. But I'm like, I never want my employees to experience what I did, where like if something would happen to me, I want to make sure this company runs without me. So that was my first goal, was that I figure out how to run a company where the owner can be plucked out. But so actually many years into it, I always kept a finger on, if someone would come knocking, I should at least entertain a conversation. So I always had that your company should be for sale model or mindset maybe. And actually went to a broker, I don't know, 6-7 years ago to see what it would even be worth. Because I was starting to notice, I think it's really good for an owner to know when they're like, because I had built a speaking and consulting company at the same time I was building Agventure, because people would ask me to speak and then help them turn around their companies and so on. And I love that side too. So I ran those in tandem for about 15 years, moonlighting, doing leadership, speaking, and that kind of thing, and still do that. But so I always was aware of, when is my mindset changing? When am I losing passion? Because I think that's a kind of a little bit of a deadly mindset path to go down when you own a company. Of when
so
you
were you
feel like
losing
you're
passion for Agventure? Is that what you're?
Well, I had noticed about, I sold about a year ago now, but I had noticed about 5 years prior to that, like I was just starting to get curious about other things to do. And like, what's over there? Because it had consumed me for 15
Sure.
years. So, and so I had kind of noticed, started to notice dwindling energy more than I had and things like that. So I started just thinking about it. And I think you think about, it's kind of like a roller coaster ride. The first highs and lows are really grand, and then it kind of just settles out at a ho-hum state at the end before you get off.
So this is sort of 2015, 2016 kind of time frame when you're starting to lose energy for it. Had you at that point paid off the debt that you originally incurred?
Yes, actually, okay. Yes. And, and so I still had the passion, and the passion I had more was for the people. Like I loved my employees. I loved our customers. I loved our community. I was growing tired of, or weary maybe, of just always figuring out how to be David in the David and Goliath picture, like how to stay relevant and in business. So I'm sorry, now I lost my train of thought of what I was going to say.
Yeah,
Can you ask that question again?
Yeah, I was just curious to know what triggered you to want to sell.
Oh, yeah. So just seeing the market change and knowing that if we wanted to go through yet another turnaround, that we would have to double down again.
What was the change in the market that you were seeing?
Well, this was pre-pandemic, but a lot of the farms were becoming corporate. A lot of our smaller to mid-sized farms were, the prices were historically bad for such a long time that farmers were having auctions left and right. So even when we were doing nothing wrong, we were losing customers because they were just leaving the industry. So I could just see the face of farming changing and going more big farm and corporate to, obviously gather the efficiencies there.
Yeah, and they would have their own suppliers for feed, the big national companies, presumably. Got it.
Yes.
Okay. So you see this writing on the wall and you think, okay, I better get out. What happens next?
So actually I was actually pretty dedicated. So I think at first when you think about selling your company, it's a blip on the radar screen and then you get re-energized again. And so the last few years that I was in the company, I was really doubling down on New Heritage and building that out as a separate brand. And it was kind of exciting because I felt like it was the future of where agribusiness is going. And that still remains the case.
But I got to believe that's causing some problems for Agventure, right? Like as you focus more on the new company, Agventure is starting to suffer, no?
So we were very transparent about where to spend our energy and who was doing what. So at that point, and for a long time before that, actually, most of my staff ran the day-to-day anyway. And so I was still there, but we worked on this new model together. Like Agventure was our largest seller of New Heritage. So, so we were proud of what we were building there. And we also decided to hire like a fractional integrator under a fractional person to help with some of the management, so I could focus there. So we made that decision as a key team. So everybody kind of knew what I was up to, but I was losing a little bit of connection, with some of the day-to-day just going elsewhere. But it's not any different than how a lot of companies do it, where you use your current resources to build a new platform.
Yeah. So you're taking money from Agventure and you're investing it into New Heritage to help it grow.
Yes.
And taking resources. So let's talk about the sale of Agventure itself. So what happens? How did that come about?
Yeah. So let's see. So it was sometime early summer or late spring, doesn't matter, of 2020. I still remember it because I almost fell off my chair. The broker for the company that bought us called, and it was a Monday morning, and he just introduced himself, and he just said, "I'm the broker for our vendor company, and I'm wondering if you would entertain a conversation of if you're ready to sell your company. We'd be interested in taking a look." And
so
my
this
answer
is a what they call a buy-side broker. So he or she represents the company that ultimately bought yours, which is called Formafeed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the Formafeed broker approaches you, and what was your reaction at the time?
Well, I was shocked because usually they don't buy out retailers, because we really were the middle person in this whole equation where, most of you could do direct to the farm instead of having that, local location now, and how things were changing. So I was a little shocked because I had actually had conversations with them. Just briefly, a few times over the years of, would you ever be interested or whatever. And it was a short conversation of, we just don't buy our retail partners and things like that. So I kind of thought it was off the table, really. And so I was a little shocked that they were even interested at all. And so, I kind of was ready for the conversation because of my mentality over the years of always saying yes to a conversation when someone approaches you.
Yeah. And so what happens next?
So we meet, at a place not local to us. 20, 25 miles down the road. I'm very, very, very private. In a local community, it's easy to watch people. And I'm just, I think with being a young widow, I just always sought out privacy to rebuild my personal life. So we met somewhere in the middle, and had a lunch and kind of went over the first round of him, just telling their intentions and me getting a little more information. And, from there we had a second lunch where we signed a non-disclosure agreements and all of the legal paperwork and shared numbers and all of that. So,
and what's your what are the emotions running through your head during these lunches? Because I got to imagine with this exciting new venture, the New Heritage Feed Company, this must feel like Christmas Day in a way, because here you are, this sort of perfectly, wrapped little gift of potentially selling the legacy business so that you could go focus on this other thing that you were excited about. Am I getting your emotions right? What were you?
I think they were all over the board, John, really, because, I think a lot of entrepreneurs in this category of, this is my baby, right. and actually even it brought up grief again, because, who am I without this company? Would I be letting, my late husband, Randy, down if I even entertained this or sold? And what would it mean for my great employees and customers and the community? And so I was concerned about all that. But, it kind of like I already had coaching clients for quite some years and did speaking and all of that. So I had a little bit of a landing net to go to if this were actually going to happen. And I had done a lot of processing of like, who am I without this company? Like the psychology of that. But so it was kind of all over the board, but really my main emotion on it was, I don't think this is going to fly, because I had reinvested all of our profits in Agventure by decision to rebuild this new company, thinking I'll scale this for the next X amount of years and get our profits back, but basically using all of our profits to fund the new thing. So I'm like, it's not going to be worth much because our bottom line numbers are reinvested.
Right. You stripped out all the profits from traditional profits from Agventures and put them into New Heritage. So you're not showing a lot on the bottom line. I want to get to how they dealt with that in valuation. Before we do, though, you mentioned something that I want to explore a little deeper. You said you'd done some work around like who am I without my business? Can you describe what that work? I mean, did you go to some retreat center and, meditate for a week on your own, or what did you do to think about
what? Very truthfully, I do have kind of a side where is very contemplative, and I don't know, my logical husband who works in logistics management would say I have the woo side, and so on.
The woo side.
Yes, like that. But so I think I did do a lot of journaling of, if I didn't have this, what would I do? Or who would I be? But I also was in a peer group of business owners for many, many years, and still am. I think it's the greatest thing people can do. And I saw some of them sell their companies. So I'm always aware, and I love human psychology. So I'm like, what's it like to sell your company? And I saw some of the dark nights of the soul that they went through, and asked a lot of questions, like, how does this feel? And kind of watch them either stumble through it or excel through it. And what were those key areas where people would get tripped up? And it really is an identity crisis for quite some time. One of my colleagues described it as a hangover. And it kind of is that, where it's like, oh, what have I done? And did I do the right thing? And you go through a little bit of it. You could go through a little bit or a lot of an identity crisis, actually, and really get stuck.
This is Built to Sell Radio. My guest today is Sandy Hansen Wolff, the former owner and CEO of Agventure Feed and Seed. My name is John Warlow. Got it. And so you'd sort of cut off some of this at the past because you'd done some of this thinking in advance. So you have these two lunches with the other side. At what point do you come clean with the other side, saying, hey, we've been taking a lot of our profit and putting it into New Heritage, so we're not showing a lot on the bottom line? Like, was it over the second lunch that you sort of revealed that piece of the equation?
Well, so I was careful because we didn't have, the first lunch was generalities, basically, because we didn't have anything legally in place to protect information being shared. I told the truth right away, and I said, we're really excited about what we're building, and we're getting synergy on it. And I know that you all know that, because you can see that some farms are buying other things besides your products and so on. And they were great. They were great to partner with. So it was a really friendly conversation. I said, we can go through this sale process, but I'm going to tell you that it's probably not going to be lucrative for me at all, because I purposely decided to keep the company and use any sort of profits, or most of them, to build out this new side. So I'm not sure what kind of numbers we're going to be looking at here. And, one thing that once we did have all of the legal paperwork in place to share information, I actually, over the years, always made a Excel spreadsheet that I exported from, our QuickBooks or whatever it was, and added back in every year any extra cost, any extra expense that I wouldn't have spent in a year where profits wouldn't have been good or something. So I had all of that. I always called it my adjusted gross income statement. Where,
your adjusted growth income statement, is that what you call it?
Gross, adjusted gross, like what would have been our income if I wouldn't have spent extra. And so we actually used that Excel spreadsheet somewhat to kind of paint the picture of how it could have looked if I wouldn't have put New Heritage Feed Co. in the mix. And so we used some of that, but really what I said is, I don't think this is a good time for me to sell because I'm not going to get anything close out of it because we're now finally turning the corner on getting some sales growth. And I was hustling, to get some retailers going and things like that. So I'm like, we're finally having fun again after a few dark years of not knowing what we were going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you say, you'd like to kind of do better, or you thought you might do better in the future, like, did you have a sense of what the company might be worth on a multiple of adjusted EBITDA? Meaning once you strip out the expenses associated with New Heritage, you've got a profit, like a healthier profit line. Had you got any sense in your mind what multiple of that profit the company would be worth? Or should be worth?
Yes. And it was fairly low, and only for the reason that most businesses like ours never sold. They went out of business.
Yeah.
And then all of the bigger players around would just assume the company. So I knew that multiplier wasn't going to be double digits like some of the tech companies were getting.
Sure.
So it was usually in our industry, someone like us, if we were lucky enough to even find a buyer, it was right around the 4 to 5% category.
4 to 5% or 4 to 5 times EBITDA?
4 to 5 times. Yeah, I apologize. 4 to 5 times. The net income or EBITDA. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. That's good for me to know. So you thought maybe you could get 4 or 5 times if you dressed up the profitability. And so what was their thinking like when they came to you with an offer? Like, how were they proposing to structure it?
So their offer was low, obviously. I mean, that's where everyone starts, right?
Lower than the 4 to 5 times the adjusted normalized EBITDA?
Yes, I think at first I would have to think back. It was, and the thing of it is, I was fairly convicted that I'm just going to have to muscle up and get through these next few years if I want to, scale this company back and build up a stronger company. And so I actually just kind of thought like, well, yes, I'm ready to sell. However, I'm not sure it's going to be good. So, I'm not going to make a short-sighted move here at all. So I was just very, very forthright about that of, I understand where you would be at with this. Where I'm at is totally different. So that took some back and forth, obviously, of how could we structure this at all. And actually, to be very frank with them, when they came to me, I said, I will entertain this process under a few conditions. One, you treat my employees well. You treat the employees very well. 2, this process is completely amiable because this is hard on me because it's my late husband's company. So there's a lot of emotion attached to it. And 3, I don't really want to know what you're going to do with the company after I sell. If it gets to that point, because I knew that they didn't need our local presence, nor did we really, except for the local, like hobby farmers that would come in. I mean, a lot of our,
if they didn't want the local presence and you're a retailer, what were they interested in?
They were interested in stopping the synergy of this new brand we were building, or this disruption that it could potentially cause. We had great customer base where we shared accounts, and then we also shared work on it, and then thus the margins. So they could have captured the rest of the margin. And then,
so these are a feed, the company that acquired you, this form of feed, they are a wholesaler or a manufacturer of feed?
Yeah, manufactured. And they have, it's a bigger company. They have many different businesses within their company. And yes, it was just made sense for them for efficiencies. that we shared a lot of the accounts anyway. So if they bought out a small partner like myself or a retailer, they could capture all the margin. And we had great employees.
When you say they didn't want the new heritage, they wanted to put a stop to the conflict. I don't understand that. What do you mean by that?
So we were building, we were at the beginning phases of being a little disruptive in our area because we were selling beef and dairy products that we used to sell under the vendor company's feed. Like it would become a customer of the vendor company, and now we were selling our products instead. And so farmers were starting to catch on to some of these new products, and so we weren't selling as much of their products, but building our new side. But we were actually we kept this conversation. We kept our work partnership going really strong. So we weren't really replacing business unless there was peril on a farm and we were in danger of losing them. So that wasn't our model, but our model was to build a new customer base with our own products. But we were working in the same area. So then, farms that were on our new heritage feed with essential oils, that can cause disruption in an area. And our goal was to have that catch on, but also keep our good partnerships in place, which can be tricky.
Yeah, for sure. So when did they let you know what they were willing to offer for your company? What was did they do it verbally, or did they send you a letter of intent of some sort?
No, they were really, yes, they honored my request of having it be a very amiable and high level process. So, I shared my financials after we had the legal paperwork in place. We met for a nice lunch with the deal team from their company, and they kind of went over their written first offer, and then I went back and did my work with my accountant and my attorney, and said yes or no or whatever, and we went from there. So it was a very professionally done process.
Got it. And how did their first offer match up with your thinking that maybe 4 or 5 times profit was reasonable, like on the adjusted profitability? Like, was it kind of close to that, or like well below that, or how did?
No, it was well below. And I understood where they were coming from too, and I just said, for this, I'm better off keeping it. Mm-hmm. And if I can make it go even for a year or two more, I'll capture this price back just in our own profit. So this really isn't something that would work. And so there was definitely back and forth, and the dealer always is going to be, and it's a game of holding our own ground, but having both sides be winners. We both want to be winners.
Yeah, out of curiosity, like, what was their reaction? Like, I'm curious to know whether, because I guess when somebody tries to negotiate with you, you can, what is it? The honey attracts more bees, or whatever that expression is. You can be super nice about it. And so when you say, like, it doesn't make sense for me to accept your offer because I get all that profit, or I get all that money if I just kept the business for a couple of years. Was their reaction to kind of slam their fist on the table and say, let me tell you why you're wrong, and have a really aggressive negotiation stance? Or were they smooth and understanding and empathetic, and like I'm trying to get inside the negotiation? Yes. Was it acrimonious, or very sort of everybody sort of?
Yes.
What was their reaction when you
so there was, obviously there was one person on the team that was the hard driver, that his job was more to stomp any sort of doubt down and make sure that I was in my own place and things like that too. And I understood that. It ticked me off once in a while. Yeah.
Do you think in retrospect, and maybe this, did they choreograph the good cop, bad cop routine in advance? Did they say, okay, we're going to meet with Sandy. I'll be the prick who drives the price, and you be the Robin who, or the good cop who kind of, do you think they had that conversation in advance?
That's a good question. I think that the person who was the broker sat in the room, and then there was 2 or 3 others. The guy who did the negotiating was really good at his job. I'll just give him that, and was it really tactical on their point? Maybe a little bit, but it was a fairly easy, small deal for them in the big picture of the deals they were making with, much larger companies. So
what made him good at his job?
He knew what buttons to push, and he was a stern negotiator. I really did want to sell. The only thing I was concerned about was my employees and the heart that I had for the company and the community and so on. I really wanted to sell, but not like we can never sell. We can never be so convicted to sell that we make a bad deal.
Right. So you were still willing to walk away.
Yes, and I did actually. Towards the end, when they said, "Okay, we've got a counter, please drive to us," which was an hour and something away, and I said, "I'm don't want to."
What is a counter?
Oh, a counter offer, like where they came back with a better price. And I said, I actually was kind of a little bit annoyed with the whole process because it was so back and forth for such a, it was a small company in the big picture of other companies they were buying. And I said, I really don't want to spend any more time on this unless you're really ready, and you've got your P's and Q's together. Otherwise, you're wasting my time. And so, the broker called and said, please come to our company headquarters. And I'm like, are you ready? Because I want to make sure that we're going to, have this professional meeting. And when I got there, they didn't even have like any written offer. It was verbal. And that kind of, inside I was steaming. And then the offer again was like, actually at this point they said, and we'll buy out New Heritage too, for $25,000, which was a complete insult to me because I had spent 2 years and multiples of that building this new company. And if I could have hit them with a broom, I would have. That's how mad I was inside. But keep your cool because they're doing their job, right? And I just said, well, it appears that we're very, we're on different planets here. And so I think for today, I think it's best that we just go back and do our work, and we'll stay good partners and doing work. And I just don't think we're even close. Yes, and the broker knew that I was about ready to snap, I think, but I was keeping my cool. I was pretty insulted, actually. But he pulled me out of the room and F-bombs were flying. I was so ticked. But I left that day. I went back in the room and I just said, I don't think we're even close. And so let's continue to do good work together, and maybe at a later time we can address this again. So that's how that day ended, which I thought going in, it was going to be the day that we verbally agreed to the offer. So yeah, so I left that meeting and I thought I was going to run the company for many more years.
And where does it go?
5 minutes down the road, the broker called and they said they were sorry and they really did want to make a deal. So then I just said, well, then we need to really cut the BS and get this done. So then things progressed fairly quickly after that.
What's the BS?
Just their like what I felt was manipulation on their part of, I was strong enough over the years of just, having to deal with much larger companies than myself. And I learned how to stand my ground. And, and I just told the broker, I said, like, I get what you're doing. It's not working. So no more stomping me down. If you really want to make a deal, let's find something that works for both of us and do it. Other than that, I'm going to go back and do my good work.
And so just to be clear, the principal negotiation point at this point is the value of the company they're willing to pay. It's not like that's what you're going back and forth on is they keep lowballing and you're like, this is not even worth the conversation.
It was a joke. because I had told them that I don't want to consider it if it's going to be an insulting offer. So,
and are you able to share, roughly what multiple of your adjusted EBITDA they were offering at this stage of the game? Are you able to share?
I think it was, so actually 5, 6, 7 years prior, I worked with a broker just to see what we would be worth. And it was, over $1 million at that point. And, we got substantially less than that in the initial deal, but how we structured it, it was probably a 4 to 5 multiplier off of our EBITDA, which was off of the adjusted EBITDA. And that still wasn't good enough for me because I'm like, this is just really low for what we've got, equipment, buildings, blah, blah, blah. And so how we structured it was they paid X amount, that multiplier, and then three years of a bonus that would be paid out annually on all customers that they kept, which I was fairly confident they'd keep quite a few of them because we worked on a lot of the accounts together already and had a great relationship. So that was my one, I don't know, way to maybe capitalize on the synergies that we were building without cutting it off totally.
Got it. And the bonus, was that sort of an all or nothing? Like if you kept 80% of the customers, you got the bonus. If you didn't, you didn't. Or was it based on each account they kept, there was a dollar amount associated with that?
Yeah, it was actually like 0.95 or 1% of the gross sales of all the customers they kept.
Okay. Okay.
So I knew that was probably going to be pretty close to what our gross sales were anyway. So far that's worked out pretty. I've gotten, every January now I'll get a check for 3 years. So I've got one, and it worked pretty good so far. But it's based on can they retain the accounts. So.
And are you involved in helping them retain the customers, or have you completely exited?
So I built the company so that I could be plucked out. And when you're plucked out, it doesn't feel very good. I'll just say that. So the day that I signed the paperwork was my last day at the company because they said, Sandy, we don't want to hurt your feelings, but we don't need you. And that was good for me somewhat because of the heartfelt nature of selling my late husband's company. But the other part is like, I remember sitting there like the week after, I'm like, can't someone just call me and ask a question? But I remembered, Sandy, you spent the last 10 years building this company to be plucked out. So be proud of that you don't have an earn out or anything. But it feels weird just to have, but like my staff knew the ins and outs of the company because I structured it that way.
Sure.
So you're proud, but it doesn't feel very good either.
Yeah. Okay. So you left the day. I'm curious about your relationship with the buy side broker. So this broker was paid by the acquirer. And how would you characterize your relationship with the broker who was paid by the acquirer?
Yeah, he was, he came from large corporate deals, so he kind of knew how to finesse a conversation and so on. And I didn't have my own broker. I didn't feel like I needed it because it was more of an internal trade. We were already familiar with each other. And so I worked with my accountant and my attorney who had been with my company for the 18 years I was there. And that worked really well. And so the broker, I just, I was, you don't want to tell all the details, obviously, but I was pretty forthright with where I was at, and so it was a really good relationship.
Even though ultimately were they clear with you that when push came to shove, their loyalty was to the acquirer? Like the acquirer was the ones paying their bills. Were they clear, or did they cross the line to make it sound like they were representing you, but also them.
Oh, yes. Well, no, I mean, I understood that. And again, like just being an observer of human psychology, he was really good at finessing that middle ground.
Yeah.
I mean, I understood he was working for the buyer, but he also knew a deal wouldn't go through if I wasn't happy too. So he never played that card outright with words, but there was it was obvious he was working for them, but he would know how to be like, yeah, that's got to be hard. Like he was very good at what he did.
Got it. So he kind of absorbed your energy, took it all in, didn't necessarily react. Got it. That's helpful for sure. All right, we're going to do something new called due diligence, which is a rapid fire list of questions. And you can just give me a short answer to each one, and this will serve as some advice for folks going through the process themselves. So, quick answer: what was the slimiest thing that an investor or acquirer ever tried to get over on you to sort of hoodwink you in the process?
Yes. I would, it was kind of a sometimes spoken, sometimes unspoken threat to take our customers, like the accounts that we shared, to take them in-house without us being there. So that threat was kind of always more in the last year spoken, more like, we can take this account anyway. So, I mean, had I not sold, they probably would have. Yeah.
In what way is that not just negotiation? Did you see that as crossing the line between like good strategic negotiation, but had it crossed the line into something more personal for you?
It was kind of on the table for a few years of, we can just take your big account customers, and we probably will at some point, because that's just it was actually fairly factual too. Like that's just the way the markets were going and the industry. So, but it was a constant reminder of where our place was and me jockeying for position as the small player in the bunch.
Biggest mistake you made in the selling process?
I don't know if it was a mistake as much as a wish. This was during the pandemic, so I was always my part in the company was always the people part, like keeping the pulse on the people. And I was working from home. And so I was very disconnected with my staff. And I just, in hindsight, I realized how miserable that made me. So I wish I could have involved in hindsight, I would have been more involved in the last year and I would have figured out, but everybody was trying to figure out, how does business leadership look under a pandemic?
What's one thing you wish you'd known before you went through the process of selling?
The heartbreak that you'll feel afterwards, because I gave and this is just the way it is.
Last question in our due diligence round is, what tool, resource, course, event did you attend that helped you inform you about the selling process? Is there somewhere you can point people to, an online course or whatever, anything that would be helpful for folks going through this for the first time?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure if there's one tool. The thing that I did most, and I don't say this just because you're one of them, but I did read books. I mean, that's the first thing I did, was read books on how to build your business so it can sell, and then what would make it sellable. Like that was
which books did you find most helpful?
And I say this, and it's a truth, because I did this 10 years ago. Whenever your book came out, Built to Sell was recommended to me by some of my colleagues.
Great. What else?
We also did, the traction model of the
Gina Wickman's book.
That entrepreneurial operating system.
Sounds like you read Michael Gerber's. You referenced Working On, Not In. Did you read the E-Myth as well?
The E-Myth. So I read some of those books, and I took them to heart, and I'm like, yes, we have to make something unique so that we're sticky and things like that. Right. So that was the first thing. The second thing is, so I don't know if there's one tool, but like I did go to some executive ed programs. I believe in ongoing education. I would, the biggest thing I did, I guess, was I met with my attorney and lawyer many years before I thought this was going to be a thing, just to get an idea of what it would look like. And then I also asked a lot of my colleagues who had gone through it.
And it sounds like you're part of a mastermind. What mastermind group are you part of?
Yeah, so I put myself in I believe everyone should have this, a peer group of other business owners. And I was in Vistage.
Great.
And also a women's business owner group called Women Presidents Organization.
WPO.
And, yes, WPO. And having a peer network, and then also having a private coach. I had a private coach for all those years too, except for the first 2 where I couldn't afford it. And she helped me a lot through that too.
That's great. So we'll put all these notes in the show notes as well, or references to the links and so forth for folks. WPO, I've definitely heard of. And would you recommend the Harvard course on negotiation strategy? Is that something you'd recommend other entrepreneurs go through?
Yes. I mean, it's not inexpensive.
I'd imagine it's Harvard.
I think it's it's worldwide known. It's known throughout the world, and people come from all over the world to go to it. And the psychology of all of this is something that we leave so much money on the table. And I know that I left money on the table too, but I probably would have left a lot more had I not put myself through education.
Okay, so the Harvard course you would recommend other entrepreneurs take?
Yes, it was excellent, and there's many books. It's kind of neat when the professors teaching you are also the books that you have on your bookshelf on negotiations. So,
right. Yeah. Who was the professor? Who was the lead professor of that?
William. It's you. I think it's URY. I'm not even sure how to say it.
Okay. We'll try to find them and put them in the
Getting to Yes, Getting More. There's a bunch of books like that. It's just really neat when the author that you just read the book on is standing right in front of you.
I'd imagine. Yeah. In the hallowed halls of Harvard, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm super grateful for you sharing your story. I think it's instructive for all entrepreneurs, in particular those who maybe haven't yet thought through, what would happen in the tragic event of, if I were not here, how would that impact my loved ones? And so I think you're sharing your stories is really, really helpful for folks. If people want to reach out, where's the best place that they do that? Are you a LinkedIn person, or where can people sort of say hi if they want to reach out?
Sandy Hansen Wolff. I'm on LinkedIn, and Sandy at sandyhansenwolff.com is my email address.
Well, I'm really grateful for you sharing the story and all of your lessons. We'll link up everything in the show notes at builttosell.com. Thank you for doing this, Sandy.
Oh, thank you. What a privilege. It's just wonderful, John. Thank you for having me as a guest.
Built to Sell Radio is produced by Haley Parkhill. Our audio and video engineer is Dennis Labataglia. If you like what you've just heard, subscribe to get a new episode delivered to your inbox each week. Just go to builttosell.com.
Thanks for listening to Built to Sell Radio with John Warrillow. For complete show notes with links to additional resources, visit builttosell.com/blog. John is the founder of the Value Builder System. To find out how to improve the value of your business by 71%, visit valuebuildersystem.com. John is also the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, and The Automatic Customer, Creating a Subscription Business in Any Industry. Connect with John at facebook.com/built-to-sell or on Twitter at John Warrillow, WARRILLOW. Thanks for listening.